Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Journey Journals by Life of Gaia. My name is Gaia, and today we have an incredible story and journey about spiritual awakening and overcoming personal loss. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have an incredible lady with me who I had the privilege of meeting several years ago. Her name is Reverend Dr. Samora Smith, and she is the Associate Director of the New Seminary for Interfaith Studies in New York City. A warm welcome to you, Samora.
Thank you, Gaia. It's really such a privilege to be here in this space with you. Thank you.
Welcome. So, Samora, you have an incredible story. Actually, you have several incredible stories and journeys into the unknown. But before we get started with the story, I'd love you to take a second to introduce yourself, please.
Yes. So as you said earlier, I'm Reverend Dr. Samora Smith. I was born and raised in New York City, and I have many titles that oftentimes I won't even sit here and go through all of them. But what I will say is that everything that I've done throughout my life that has brought me to this moment has really shaped who I am, and were often things that were born from either a loss or a struggle or something that was testing me to be my more authentic self. And so it's one thing, we walk around with our titles, we walk around with our so-called identities, but the truth is that they're just labels that represent a story and represent a journey. And so that is who I am. And when I think of the I am statement, I really most relate to my birth name, which is Samora. And it's a funny little story. My mom, my maternal grandfather's name was Samuel, and he passed away when my mother was very young. And she heard that song by Dean Martin, which is called That's Amore. And she came up with the name Samora. And of course, as we know, amore means love. And the interesting thing about that particular word is that many people have coined me as Dr. Love. And so oftentimes when I'm in the circles that I serve and the people that I am around, they call me Dr. Love without even knowing the story of my name.
Samora, you had a profound spiritual awakening in your mid-20s, right? Could you tell us how the story began for you and how it all unfolded?
Yes. Well, I can say that was a peak at that time, because there was definitely a lead up to that. I became a mom when I was 27 years old. I was on my musical path. I have a musical background, and my entire life, from very early childhood, my spiritual connection to what I thought was source, or whatever we would call it, because I was raised in a pretty open spiritual environment, was music. And I remember the times when even my grandmother, she was afflicted with stage 4 cancer. And the only time she had no pain was when I would sing to her. And so music was the thing that brought me around the world. It got me into, places that I never even thought were even possible growing up, because of this gift that Creator had given me. So I had met my children's father during a musical, a musical situation that I was in, and we completely clicked right away. And through that journey, I became pregnant with my son, and learned maybe a little bit into the birth, after the birth, that he was different. And when I say different, I felt even through birthing him that he had come here with a very profound message. And I'd always been a person that attuned to people that were so-called different, or now that I understand it as an adult, like as an older person, I always resonated with people that came here that were not defined by society. And I knew when this child was born that there was something different about him. And he awakened something in me that said, there's more to this life. There's more that you're here to do. So throughout his child's child rearing years, he didn't speak. He did things differently. Even clothing were not, he couldn't relate to the things that we normally would be looking forward to. And as a result, I felt very alone. I felt like no one understood me or understood him. And it was almost like we were just like existing without, in a bubble in a way. And it put a strain on my relationship with his father. And I felt completely isolated. But in this isolation, I also realized that I needed to look within and go within and seek what it actually was that was nudging me. And part of that awakening happened through my understanding that we come here with a purpose. And part of my purpose at that point was to learn how to open myself up to Creator and all the things that were being shown to me without words, without the typical in the box structure. And through his childhood, I was drawn to go to this program, which was called the New Seminary. And when I got there, part of what nudged me there was the fact that I didn't have a faith base, but I had brought my son when he was about 7 years old, 8 years old, to a Buddhist meeting. My friend was like, "Oh, you should come, bring the kids." And it's family oriented. Everybody's very welcoming. And it was the Buddhism where you chant one phrase. It's Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And so all these people, it was like probably hundreds and hundreds of people around us chanting this over and over and over again. And so my son, who at that point didn't speak, he used single words like cookie and, food words, he started to chant. And not only did he start to chant, it was when we got home that he continued to chant. And when the following day he says to me, Buddhist center, I knew that there was something that resonated on a profound level that I could not put words to, that he was pushing me more towards this program. And so when I went into this program, a lot of it was that awakening, was that process of figuring out, oh my gosh, there's more to this life than, what you know. And my son, Caleb, was the one who really showed me to that door.
Samora, where did this spiritual awakening lead you to? And can you tell us about your being called into the ministry?
Yes. So it was interesting because I kept seeing this symbol over and over again. I would walk around, and I'm in New York City. So I would walk around and I would keep seeing the symbol of all these different faiths in a wheel. And I was like, I don't know what this is. And right at the time when I was about to sort of make the decision to split up with my partner, I went to this program called The Circle. And it was a workshop. And the circle in the program flyer at the bottom of it was this very same wheel. And I'm like, okay, what is this wheel? Why do I keep seeing this wheel? And sure enough, I found out that it was connected to this program, which is called the New Seminary for Interfaith Studies. And it was based in New York, and it was founded by a rabbi, and actually Swami Satchidananda, who was the yogi that was very well known for blessing the famous Woodstock festival. He had been one of the main people that brought yoga to the United States. And then him and Rabbi Gelberman met, and they instantly just became brothers and realized that part of their mission at that time, and we're talking 41 years ago, was to that we're all one, that all paths lead to the same place. And I was always of that vibration. Even as a little kid, my mom would have books about all these different spiritual paths and tarot cards, all sorts of things around the house. And I was very drawn to seeking, like, what does this mean and what is the meaning behind? And I guess not being raised with a specific religion, I guess I had a more, what I call now, a fluid understanding of what spirit could be, or what, the ultimate path is. And to this day, I still, wouldn't even be able to say that I know. But what I do understand is that we all have a light that we carry. And within that light is what our path, that's where our path is. And to answer your question in terms of the ministry piece of it, I had no idea that that's where it would lead. So when I went to enroll in this program, I went to my mom and I said, I need a reference letter for a spiritual program. And she's like, well, okay. And so she wrote this beautiful letter about how she observed my parenting this child who was different, and how she just saw my heart was always the thing that led everything that I do. And unfortunately, she was also diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer only 6 months before I was ordained. And I felt that there was something inside of that was not a coincidence. My very first year in that program, I also had a young man who I was mentoring that stayed with me for a short period of time, take his own life while he was in my life. And that all happened while I was as part of this program.
I'm sorry for your loss. I do know that once you joined this 2-year program, you were faced with a lot of personal hardship, aside from your mom and this other gentleman. I would like to learn a little bit more about what these personal hardships were and how you found the strength and what you did to overcome them.
Yes, I would say that without this community, I can't even imagine how I would have endured. At that point, I had 2 young children. I also had birthed my daughter a couple of years after my son. And so here I was, with 2 very, very young children on my own, enrolled in this program. And my mother was besides, losing my dear friend's nephew to a very tragic ending. I then, realized that my mom, even though her diagnosis was very quick and she left us very, very in a very short period of time, that it was one of the most profound losses that I could have ever imagined at that point. My children were the anchors. They were my reminders every single day. I have to keep going. I have to keep going. And then right after my mom passed away, her sister, who had helped me through the entire process of caretaking my mother, she was then diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And she had a very quick illness as well. And I had to say goodbye to her only a month after I was ordained. And right after that, both of my sisters were afflicted with illnesses. My eldest sister, who I grew up with, was diagnosed with lung cancer. Luckily, I was able to be with her for another year. But then my younger sister had a major stroke while she was at work and became incapacitated. So all of this happened on top of me losing my core relationship support system. I, at that point, took out probably 5 life insurance policies because I was like, okay, if this is all happening, what's going to happen to me? And it was really challenging. I have to say that I look at that now. We're talking maybe 5, no, it's like 10 years now, that to look at that and realize how much I've overcome. I also see that this spiritual path and community is what really upheld me and allowed me to just be able to work through the trauma, at the same time understanding that there's a bigger picture to all of this.
Samora, I mean, you essentially, dealt with a massive amount of loss in a very short space of time. I mean, you almost lost most of your family in a short space of time. And I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about your family, because I know there were some challenges there too, in your upbringing, in your childhood, a lot around addiction. Would you mind sharing around that?
Yeah, so growing up as a 70s child, both my parents had a very interesting story. My mom was from a family, very like, traditional, conventional family, Jewish family in Brooklyn. And her father was tragically killed by a train when she was 14 years old. And that changed her entire life, because basically her mother was from that, time period when you really depended on one income, and you stayed home and took care of the kids. So my grandmother didn't know what to do. And unfortunately, she had 2 daughters at that time that were young, and she clung to her youngest daughter and kind of isolated my mother. And my mother, being the sort of black sheep that she was anyway, she said, okay, fine, I'm gonna go and figure out my own path. And that led her to the West Village in New York, and she met my father, who was a jazz musician. He played flute. He was in Washington Square Park, a very famous park where like Jimi Hendrix and all the people, would hang out and just sit there and protest the war and hang out and play music. So this is where they met. And at the time, it was very sort of, even in New York City, it was just kind of, I don't know, because of the fact that he was Black and she was white, it was controversial. So as a result, she was disowned by her family because she loved my father. And then my father was also abandoned very young, because he was also a product of both his parents met in high school and had him when they were like 15 years old down in North Carolina, and they were not married. So as a result, my great grandmother, she snatched her daughter and my dad up and moved to New York City so that they could basically, start over. And so he pretty much raised himself. And so when they both met, they were in the jazz scene and hanging out, and unfortunately also became heroin addicts. And so by the time I was born, they were both on the methadone program, which was new. There were trials at that time. And it was a pretty rocky upbringing, to put it lightly. They were not together by the time I was a toddler, but my mom really did struggle to figure out how to raise 2 daughters on her own, not having much of an education because of the fact that she pretty much ran away from home to be with my dad. And the great thing about her was the fact that she was so intelligent and well-read. She always had books everywhere, so she was always reading, and she was very open-minded and liberal. So I was raised with a really broad perspective on humanity, and just we always had the pets that either had a broken leg or was blind in one eye. Every single friend of hers or pet or anything that was in my environment was always one that had something that was different. And I linked that back to just my whole life, and what I'm drawn to as well. It seems to have that pattern of not looking at things as perfection, but seeing that we're all here, equal. We're all connected, and that all things, are made from the same thing. And so I was lucky enough to have a mother who was able to overcome some major obstacles. And later, before she passed away, she earned 3 master's degrees and was one of the top known addiction counselors in all of the East Coast. So to think about what she accomplished and was able to do, I always have that as my reminder that you can really overcome anything.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think I'm starting to answer my own next question, because I'm starting to see where all this resilience comes from. Because my next question was, to be experiencing all of this tragedy in the midst of your program, and to have such a challenging upbringing and childhood, and dealing with these profound losses. I wanted to know how it changed your perspective on life, your faith, and your actual role in the ministry while you were in it.
Yeah, it's all about embracing the moment. Right now, every single day, I thank Creator for waking me up. I mean, that's where I'm at. Every single moment, every person, every experience, everything that I do is filled with full intention and gratitude. And without that, I would be of a much lower vibration. And so being the life learner that I've always been and was raised around life learners, if I see something and I feel pulled towards something, I will go for it, and I will put my full self into it. And every person that I'm meeting now in my life right now always carries a lesson and a message. Sometimes it's, going to be a painful experience. Sometimes it's going to be a joyful experience. But what I realize is that without those two, real acknowledgments, like that those energies have to sort of coexist, that's what our life force really is. It's about embracing the moment, good or bad. And when I am around people that are seeking, and that are maybe perhaps even in what we often call, like, the dark moments, and those are often leading us to a spiritual awakening, I just remind them that we are all containers of love and energy, and everything is possible. And oftentimes I call my ministry the ministry of possibility. And in the new seminary, we call it the ministry of presence. And presence is huge, because presence is what allows us to stop in that moment and say, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And it's interesting, because as I learned more about the foundation and the founders of the new seminary, Rabbi Gelberman said there should have been an 11th commandment. And he says the 11th commandment should have been, thou shalt have purpose. And I agree. I really do agree that when a person is struggling in their life, a lot of times it's because they don't know their purpose. And so a lot of what I do now is carry the intention that everything that I do, no matter where I am, what has come, that it's all with some form and level of purpose.
Purpose is a very big topic of discussion worldwide at the moment. And I have one question for you. What do you suggest to people to do to find purpose?
Well, it's a journey. It's a journey. The ministry of presence is about going within and asking those challenging questions, and really looking at those labels that society may have put upon us, or those beliefs that may have been given to us, passed down through generations. Many of us are carrying, the weight of generational trauma in our DNA without even knowing that we have the choice in this lifetime, in this moment, to restructure that and reclaim who we are in this moment and not have to. We can acknowledge their struggle. We can acknowledge, that all of us are on this path, but what we do with it has so much to do with bringing us to our purpose. And I have found that the more I give, the more I give outward and do things in a way that's not about receiving, that I am lighting small little candles next to a person and handing it to them and saying, go with this. This is your light now. What are you going to do with it?
Samora, speaking of understanding purpose and fulfillment, right? You wanted to entitle this particular interview and the accompanying article "Journey to the One." Okay. And I wanted to have a conversation with you around what journey to the one means to you. Okay. And how it's shaped how it's helped shape your understanding of fulfillment and purpose along your journey.
I would say that the one is profound. It's takes me to that belief within myself that we are all made of a sound, that we all vibrate as a tone. And that tone is creator. That tone is the reminder of the heartbeat, which is the earth, the mother, and that we are born of this one light that has that has its tone. So when I think about the journey to the one, in the Jewish faith, they call it the Shekinah, and the Shekinah is that small light that when we're born of light. And as we grow, we are, extending that light. And so for me, that is what it means. That oneness is connecting to that inner voice that connects us to the stars and to the infinite.
How has your personal journey and all these challenges and difficulties and learnings and understandings and awakenings influence the way that you approach and guide others in their spiritual growth?
What I would say is that most of us walk around wanting to be seen and heard and have this belief that somehow we matter. And so the first thing that I do when I meet someone is look at them and just let them know that I see you. And that's a profound way to connect, because we can have our titles, we can show up as a leader, as a consumer, as a student, whatever it is. But at the core of who we are is connection. And that we're all, we are all one. We may not have oneness in the sense that I could look at someone and not agree with how they lead their lives or their political beliefs, or maybe they're killers. Maybe they're people that really do things that hurt others. I would not say that I'm one with them. However, we all come from the same substance. And that is why I know the possibility of anyone transforming that to something of light is possible. And oftentimes people are not aware of that until you recognize the light in them. And so that is how I take much of my experience and much of the struggle that I've gone through and that continue to go through, that this is not, it doesn't end here. It's a story that we tell ourselves, that we're walking around with a story. And that story can be expanded to mean something great, and we can shift it.
So the calling to the ministry is a very, very specific calling, and definitely not everyone is called to the ministry. What advice or suggestions would you give to someone who's feeling a calling towards ministry, but they may be uncertain because of personal hardships or self-doubt or anything like that, what advice would you give them now coming from the other side?
Well, for clarity, I want to address the word minister and address the word ministry. We're born ministers. We don't become ordained of something that we aren't already. This is not a path that we choose. This is a path that chooses us. And most people that come to the school or come to any program are called there. I have met so many people over the years that will say, oh, I was looking at that for like 20 years and it, I just didn't have time or I didn't have the money or I didn't know. And they come to the door at 20 years, later. And you'll hear this very often that even as a child, I remember I had a very profound experience with someone that signed up for the program last year. And he has led a life of sort of the outcast. He's homosexual. He was raised Catholic and always felt like there was something wrong with him, that he was, living in sin, essentially. And one day I was in a program or a meeting with him. This was before he had joined the ministry. And I said to him, I said, I had this dream that came to me about you. And I saw you in a robe or in some sort of setting where you were holding this space for many. And he started to cry. And he said, you don't understand, Samora. He said, since I was a little child, I always knew that I wanted to be a priest. And he said that it wasn't until I had opened that possibility in him to even think this way, because his ministry at this point is music. He's one of the most amazing musicians, and he worked with Hay House on the cancer, healing yourself, healing your body. And all this time he didn't even think that it was a possibility. But when you look at somebody, you look at their soul, you look at their spirit, it's not about the action. It's about that this is something that calls you. And I didn't ever see myself doing any of that. And ministry itself is not connected to Christianity or Catholicism or Buddhism. It's not a specific faith. Ministry is a call to serve the higher part of yourself. And that's how I see it. And even in interfaith, people will walk around and say, oh, I'm an interfaith minister. There's no such thing. It's a quality. It's an identity it's a conversation. And so it's meaning that you're honoring and respecting people's journey.
Right. And it sounds like it's almost a way of being instead of, what you do or say. So
it's the I am statement, which is a huge part of our curriculum. It's really looking at, who am I? And what we say after those two words means a lot in the world.
Speaking of labels and definitions, you have now come full circle as the associate director of the ministry. What are some of the key responsibilities in that particular role? Because then we're going to speak about a couple of other roles. And how do you continue to, sort of make a positive impact on others through your role?
Well, people are showing up to the door now of all different, understandings of their own path. So all different ages. There's many herbalists that are now showing up to the work. It's really beautiful. And what I would say to answer that, my responsibility is to carry and be the space keeper. In some ways, I'm sort of like that a divine feminine energy, because my director, Dr. J, he has had the responsibility of the seminary for 16 years. And the first 13 years, he had to fight to keep that position. Many people tried to grab it from him and tell him that he shouldn't be it. And what's beautiful is that when we connected, it was right around the time of when the lockdowns were happening across the globe. And he, through his DNA, Dr. J, his full name is James Spates. He had done some DNA testing, and through this very deep journey himself, and this is a man who is at this point in his late 60s, found out that he's actually the descendant of one of the first royal families of Benin in Africa. And it took him down this very, very profound path. And he's a prince. So he goes to do the ceremony in Africa to be officially like ordained. And actually the queen at the time during the ceremony, she said to him, "You can't become what you aren't already," right? So again, that message was resounding for him as well. And he had said that none of the cell service, nothing was working. Like he couldn't call out, he couldn't receive calls. And he said while he was there in ceremony, like maybe the night after, his phone rings and it's me. And I was the only one who could get through. He couldn't get through to his daughters, to his wife, nobody. My phone call went through, and he says to this day that he knew that I was supposed to be there by his side to continue carrying this this school, this energy, this portal, because I was the one that got through that day. And it's almost like as soon as he said, because he hasn't allowed anyone to hold that position because he has held it so in such a protective way. And so it was a profound statement of his faith in me that also gave me the ability to now, I started a spiritual coaching program. So now people can join and get certification for that. And this year I'm launching the medicine of sound as medicine. It's called a certification on learning from many spiritual paths, because all modalities are born from many ancient wisdom keepers. And so I'm very rooted in indigenous work, and I've been called to do this. And so I use much of my medicine, I'll call it, is through working with sound and vibration. So this year I'm also launching a certification called Sound as Medicine.
Samora, this is the thing that has always astounded me about you is, speaking of positions, in this particular interview, we talking about your position as the Associate Director of the new Seminary of Interfaith Studies. But I also know you to be an incredible sound healer, to have profound knowledge on things like the medicine wheel. And by the way, for those of you watching, these are all interviews that we're planning to schedule and talk about later, because Dr. Samora is an absolute wealth of information. And not only is she a sound healer and a spiritual coach, she's also an ordained minister. So often on the weekends, she's marrying people in beautiful ceremonies. And another really, really fascinating thing that I find is she's also a member of the Lakota tribe. So these are all these absolutely beautiful aspects that I feel make you this incredibly multifaceted, fascinating human being that you are. And I so appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Samora, I wanted to ask, I know you, like myself, are an avid reader and I love book recommendations. I know you have literally hundreds and that it's probably challenging for you to whittle it down to a couple. But I would love to ask you if you have a couple of, recommendations of books that were life-changing for you or that you feel could be helpful to people.
One book that in particular that brought me to relationships was, it's called A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. That book changed a lot of my perspective on relationships and just the accountability of our path. So that was one book that was really profound. And there is one chapter, I think it's chapter 6 on relationships. It's beautiful. Another one that I mentioned to Gaia before we started this talk was It's in the Art of Falling in Love by Brenda Shoshana. That also was right before I entered into the new seminary. And I was really struggling with codependency, struggling with my own ability to understand myself as an individual. I was always looking to others to define me. That book really stopped me in my tracks for a moment and made me realize there is more to this. So those are 2 books. And then I also love The Seed of the Soul, which that also was a profound a book for me as well.
Thank you. All great recommendations, and I'm looking forward to reading some of those myself. So, Samora, to wrap up, what is your message to the world?
That love is the center of who we are, and it is the core of who we are. And if we're able to resonate that into ourselves, our own being, our own understanding of why we're here, then we will naturally resonate out to the next person and the next person. It's a constant wave of vibration, and it's something that nothing else can affect it. Hate cannot exist as long as love is there.
That's a beautiful message, very profound. And speaking of love and appreciation, I would like to take a moment to express my love and appreciation for you, and to take a moment to acknowledge you for, first of all, being an incredible mother, right? I've seen how you are with your children, and you're an absolutely incredible mother. And not only an incredible mother, but also for seeing the gift in, Caleb's differences, and seeing that as a profound message and a gift for yourself. I want to acknowledge you for being a lifelong learner. You are always in the process of learning. Every time I speak to you, you taking on something huge, something new. I love that about you. I am profoundly grateful for the very first experience that we shared together in a group. It was a profoundly spiritual experience, which I believe will keep us tied to each other and connected for the rest of our lives. And I love the idea of that. And I love watching all the people that you marry, every single weekend on social media. I love seeing the joy and the space that you hold, and the uniting of couples that you do. I think it's absolutely beautiful. So I wanted to say thank you for spending this time with me. It's always such a gift. I just love it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, my sister.
If you have enjoyed this conversation today, we would love for you to comment. If you have questions for Dr. Samora, please put them in the comments below. We'll also be sharing a link to the new seminary and all the other links and book recommendations that Dr. Samora mentioned. And yes, please feel free to like, subscribe, and also stay tuned for the next interviews that we'll be doing, because as I mentioned, Dr. Samora has incredible information about the medicine wheel to share, about the Lakota tribe, about sound healing. So I personally am very much looking forward to those discussions. Again, thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye.